Hello and welcome to the Sidekick Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Hope Virgo. Hope is a mental health campaigner, public speaker and author of Stand Tall Little Girl, Facing Up to Anorexia. Good morning, Hope. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
No, thanks so much for having me. It's really good to be here. Obviously not in person, but remotely.
Absolutely. Frankly, it does feel like in person. I'm in my daughter's nursery at the moment. You are in your kitchen?
Bedroom,
You're in
actually.
your bedroom, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's awesome to have you, and I think the goal of today is to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you and are available and accessible to other people. And we believe that by discussing your journey, we hope to share and normalize conversations about mental health, as often people are not alone in these experiences. Sound good?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Hope, right, over to you. We'd love to hear about your mental health journey.
Yeah. So it's quite long. So I'll probably I'll give you a bit of, and then we can kind of see where it goes from there.
Perfect.
But so I developed anorexia when I was about 12, 13 years old. For me, the anorexia was like a complete coping mechanism to life. So kind of dealing with emotions and feelings that I didn't really want to feel. I was also sexually abused, so kind of going through that trauma was, I guess for me was like it became a bit of a clutch to the eating disorder and a bit of a comfort around that. And I ended up hiding it for about 4 years from people around me. So eating disorders are really, really secretive illnesses. You don't always realize that you're doing something the matter, but then at the same time, you're too afraid to speak up about it because you're afraid what people will think and what people will say. And because at that point in my life, the eating disorder was just always making me feel so good about everything going on. I just kept kind of clinging onto it and hiding it and doing exactly what it wanted me to do with regards to food, drinking and exercise.
And that's the thing. So you were very young, you're 12 at the time. Did you know you had an eating disorder then? Or was it just another behavior?
No, so I didn't actually. So I think this is actually something that's probably got harder for people nowadays than it was arguably when I was that age. And I'm only 30, so I'm not even like ridiculously old either. But like nowadays when someone develops an eating disorder, because eating disorder culture is so normalized, I think it makes you question what you're doing. And it means that like a lot of us go on diets, or we normalize kind of how little we're eating. And whilst that was a thing when I was growing up, it wasn't quite to the extent that it is now. So I think for most people with eating disorders, you don't realize there's anything the matter. You kind of assume what you're doing is okay. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it makes you feel so much better. You just assume that what you're doing is totally normal and totally fine, and you just adapt to it, don't you?
And that's a natural human response, isn't it? You're like, I'm feeling this, like you said, some tragic pain through some awful situations that have gone on previously, and you're doing something to make yourself feel better, which to you is a positive thing.
Exactly.
However, as that progresses, I can only imagine, I'm sure you're going on to say that can start to really hurt you physically. And therefore you are then causing yourself pain, but the psychology behind it is so strong that I assume it's extremely difficult to break.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it is. And I think like for me, when I was first unwell, was the fact it made me feel so good was what I clung on to. And it was like the fear, I guess, as well, then actually, that if you take away that one coping mechanism to life, like what are we going to replace it with? Like what's going to happen? Like how will that feel? What will people think? Like, will I actually have to start kind of communicating with other people? And it becomes a really easy way to show that you're not okay and to kind of express yourself in that way, whilst at the same time giving you the control and numbing all of those emotions that you just don't want to feel.
It's interesting you say that. So actually it's by reinforcing those behaviors, you're signaling to the outside world that I'm not okay, but I'm not going to talk about it because it's very painful. And frankly, it's complicated to talk about. How do you start to approach these conversations, especially when you're 12, 13, 14? I assume when you're 30 now and you've gone through this, you've gone through this 20 or 18-year journey, it's easier to articulate, but also you're a very open human being who's comfortable with talking about it. But to a lot of people who are still in that secret, that must be so hard.
Yeah, and I think it is. And I think particularly with like the pandemic and stuff, and I guess as well because more people are talking about mental health now, which is amazing. But I think what we like over the last kind of year with like the pandemic, with the increase in people struggling, it can be really difficult to feel really heard. Yeah. And I think the thing I struggle with more now is that because my family probably, well, they know that when I was at my absolute worst was when I was really, really struggling, when I was kind of getting treatment and support and stuff and putting on that weight. It meant that actually in the pandemic, I had to try and be really, really vocal about exactly what I needed and how things were going. And I guess the eating disorder uses opportunities like that to try and be like, actually, the easy way to show people you're not okay is to stop eating again or to start exercising too much. So it's like this constant kind of, battle in your head. And then also just feeling guilty when you do start communicating. And actually, when you start to be honest with people, you're like, what have I just done? Like, what have I just said? Like, are people going to call me out on it? Like, are people going to understand and how they're going to react?
And it's tricky, especially during lockdowns and, you know, that we're experiencing at the moment when everything does feel out of control.
Yeah.
And I think you raise a really, really valid point that there is a very blurry area with eating disorders, male and female. There is the extreme end, what you've experienced. There's a blurry in the middle where people, and I do think a lot of people have unhealthy relationships with food. You go to, you know, when we were allowed out to dinner, whatever it was, and so you'd walk in and go, oh, you look awesome. But actually what they're saying is that you look thinner.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's this reinforcement of me losing weight is actually better for society, better for people. And that makes you feel good, but it unfortunately starts to unravel a really kind of a very vicious psychology, which it's very difficult to escape from.
Yeah, no, and do you know what, I completely agree with that. And I think it's so difficult nowadays. And you're right, like people always are complimenting weight loss and kind of putting it on this pedestal. And it's like
celebrating it.
Yeah, and I'm like, do you know what? Just because someone's losing weight, it doesn't mean they're actually healthy. They could, like, they might not even have an eating disorder. They might have had COVID. They might have cancer. Like anything else could be going on. But we still glorify it. And I think that makes it so difficult when you're at that state. And I think as well, it's interesting because I do a lot of campaigning work around eating disorder access and support and kind of issues around BMI. And actually quite often you have someone who's obsessively working out, who firstly their BMI will be higher potentially because they've got all that muscle. But secondly, because of society, we're like, oh, it's amazing. Like they've got loads of muscle, they're looking really healthy. And actually, again, they could have this compulsion to be exercising 24/7, but we just don't question that and we make that okay.
Yeah, and frankly, you know, watching things on Netflix which are celebrating, you know, for example, you know, I have friends who do CrossFit.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, outside of that, it looks pretty obsessive. I'm not saying that CrossFit is, you know, but a lot of people are participating in this very high intensity exercise and controlling what they're eating. To me, it doesn't seem like it's about the exercise. It seems to be about something else. And whenever you speak to people who are participating in the activities, you know, especially their friends, you know, perhaps going back, there is some things that are going on which perhaps they would benefit from talking about to release that compulsion to always exercise or to eat in a certain way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you know what, it's so interesting to say, because I think as well, and I was thinking about this morning randomly, was with things like exercise and normalizing that, we've also normalized kind of suppressing our hunger through having like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. And actually this morning I was like unsatisfied after my breakfast. So like half an hour later, I was like, went to make another cup of coffee. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm probably still hungry. So, and I think we as individuals, we have to reassess our relationship with food and
100%.
Like exercise. And I know that with I don't know a huge amount about this, but with Dry January, they're encouraging people to reassess their relationship with exercise. And actually we need to be doing that on a week-to-week basis if we feel the need to with food. And actually recently I've also been doing this like challenge around my breakfasts and introducing like a little bit more variety into what I'm eating. And for me, obviously I'm doing it because I'm conscious that the eating disorder is probably trying at the moment to try and claw its way back in and take kind of the reins and make me feel better in the short term and whatnot. So I'm very conscious of that. So by being a bit more varied on things, but actually even just from kind of doing this over the last couple of weeks, I've had a lot of people who don't even have eating disorders contact me being like, do you know what, like I have the same thing every day. I don't even think about it. I have my breakfast at the same time. And whilst like, yeah, that's fine, but at the same time, if we cannot add that variety, if that variety is added in and challenges us or makes us feel uncomfortable, that's when I think we need to start that reassessment. And people who exercise, like if you're going to CrossFit every single day, and if you don't go for one day you feel guilty, maybe you need to step back and be like, actually, this isn't healthy.
Yeah, and I think that's it's such a good way to put it, about that kind of consciously appraising what, you know, why you're doing certain things in terms of food and exercise. And I think like you said, that, you know, if we could ask why more often, and like you said, right, you know, you're like, I'm going to have another cup of coffee, but actually you pause and go, hold on, why do I need another cup of coffee? Oh, hold on, actually I'm hungry. Okay, I need to eat. It's amazing that the brain, no matter how magical and complex and awesome it is, it can confuse us. And frankly, a lot of the time, you know, I think there's a question, but can you trust what it says initially when it has these snap judgments? If you are able to pause, and, you know, for me, a big vice was sugary things, having a sweet tooth. I realized every time I reached for a chocolate bar and I said, why? I was like, hold on, it's not about the chocolate. It's like, I'm worried about something over here. And I started to really pull apart that kind of need to quickly judge, right, exercise, food, that's a quick fix. But actually, to pull apart, it's often never about the food. And once I address the other thing, actually, I don't really want a bloody chocolate bar.
Yeah, no, it's totally true, isn't it? It's so interesting. And I think that is, and it's hard, I think, because you have to reevaluate that yourself. And particularly when you've had an eating disorder, like there's a lot of guilt wrapped up in assessing that. And even this morning, I was like, oh, I'm really proud of myself. Like I did this. And then I was like, oh, but how does this work for the rest of the day? And I think that's when you, in recovery, are able to move into a place where you're intuitively eating and not kind of not overthinking every single thing you're having. But we all have to do it, and we have to work it. Yeah, we have to work out,
isn't it?
Yeah, and whether the behavior is constructive or destructive, I think.
100%. So I'd like to just go back to, because you talk about that journey and the recovery. Just so from the beginning, how did that play out? If you don't mind me asking, how did it play out, and how did you come to that recovery and seeing those steps? Because I'm sure there's people listening who really are struggling with this, and to hear that journey would be a source of inspiration, like you are.
So I hid it for quite a long time, so about 4 years, and then ended up actually my school got in touch with my mum, so I went to my doctor and then was referred to CAMS, so Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services, particularly the eating disorder service there. I guess was lucky back then as well, because there isn't the huge waiting lists for services, particularly when it comes to eating disorder. So I was able to be seen kind of quite quickly, which was really helpful. And then I kind of had this massive assessment, and looking back, it was a little bit ridiculous. I remember kind of sitting there for like an hour while my mum kind of talked and moaned, and it was just awful. And I was just sitting there thinking, no one really gets what's going on. Like no one's asked, no one really understands. Like, and then at the end of that appointment, I filled in quite a lot of questionnaires, kind of judging my mood, kind of things about body image and food and my relationships with people and things like that. And it was actually my second appointment that they diagnosed me with anorexia. But I just couldn't take the diagnosis. I didn't believe it. I thought they were trying to take away this one thing in my life that made everything okay. And it was interesting because actually that evening I went home and I Googled anorexia and spent loads of time looking kind of into it, and would end up on like these rabbit holes on the internet, kind of various sites and really dangerous stuff. And I think there were probably moments over kind of the next 6 months where I was like, maybe I've got something the matter. But I just wasn't ready to let it go, because I guess I was afraid that there was nothing to replace it with. And
also, you said it was part of you.
And
it worked for you. But I suppose to see that as something that was, you know, I suppose, how do you put it? Like malign, malignant, something that is wrong, when actually this is something that is actually fundamentally, especially during those formative years where your psychology and your brain is changing, like that is part of you. You talk about the eating disorder, you know, from my understanding, I don't have, you know, a huge amount of experience. It is part of you, and I'm not sure whether it will ever leave you. Is that something which you will always be challenged with and battle with? It's something that you are able to defeat.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So I guess from that like identity perspective, and the thing that's part of you is like, I know I often talk about the anorexia as like kind of my best friend but my worst enemy, because it's giving you something, but what it is giving you is really dangerous and it's not right. I do believe 100% that full recovery is possible, and I
Yeah.
think I know a handful of people who've got to that stage
And
where,
that's so encouraging, isn't it?
oh, it's amazing. And I think like for me, the reality is, and kind of laying everything on the table, is I've probably had glimpses of full recovery in the last kind of 11 years since coming out of hospital. And then I've kind of hung on to those moments, but then something's maybe happened that's kind of tripped me up a little bit. And I think the big thing for me, and something that I'm kind of working through at the moment, is I've never really been happy with my set point weight. So the weight that I should be at to be a healthy weight. And I guess I realized over the last year that probably, and I think the lockdown probably made me realize this, was actually some of those behaviors that I picked up along the way. Like I do exercise, and I use that as a way to manage my well-being. I probably had convinced myself that my relationship with exercise was totally normal, and that I was fine with food, and I could go on holiday, and I could do all of this sort of stuff. But actually, just over the last kind of 3 weeks, I've been like, actually, do you know what? Like, this isn't healthy. Like, this isn't right. And I think, yeah, like where I'm at the moment is, I think it's going to be, if I'm honest, like a really difficult 6 months of getting to kind of the set point that my body needs to be at, and moving back into that space where I can intuitively eat, but I also feel confident that I can do it. And I think, yeah, I'm in a space where I'm able to do that. And I think with eating disorders, you function, you coast along a lot, and you have to challenge it. Like, you have to challenge it, because if you're not challenging it, it pulls you back in.
And that's a challenge. And I think those kind of three elements that, you know, like you said, being happy with your set weight, being content, being confident, and then being able to bring in those behaviors to be able to reinforce that, I mean, it sounds like a tightrope. That doesn't seem, it seems like it's not like you get to a level and you plateau and you think, right, I'm good. Like, I assume for a period of time, those forces are pulling you in every direction. So actually to balance them can be very, very difficult and challenging.
Yeah, no, and it literally, yeah, it is exactly like that. Like, you're kind of challenging yourself. Yeah, you have to challenge yourself enough to push back on the eating disorder thinking. But then at the same time, you know that if you challenge yourself too much, then you might compensate or destruct, like, even that same evening or the next week. So it is working out, yeah, how much you can push yourself. And also along the way, like, making sure that you've got a way to deal with it, and being really kind of open and frank with people about, actually, this is what's going on. And I think that's probably the hardest thing. And I guess for me, because I talk very openly about my recovery, I've actually just over the weekend kind of had to be really honest with people on social media and being like, actually, do you know what? Like, I've never been happy with the weight that I've got to at a healthy weight. And I've never been happy with that set point. And like, I guess for me, like, just being vocal about that, whilst felt absolutely terrifying, it brings that kind of eating disorder behavior a bit out into the kind of light. And it makes people just, I guess it helps people to be accountable to you as well, without people kind of interfering and judging your every move.
And also there's some really nice imagery there about bringing that eating disorder, like you said, your best friend and your worst enemy, out in front of you and say, look, I am going to challenge you. Like, I am, like, you are not going to control me. Like you, yes, you might be there for a long time and hopefully you will disappear at some point, but I'm going to be the boss of this. And I think that's interesting what you said about, you know, you've really, it seems like, and maybe there's parallels when coming to recovery through addiction at the same time, that you fundamentally, in order to go through that recovery process, you have to want to do it. And it has, it can't just be, you know, a hobby on the sideline. I assume it's an all-encompassing part of your life.
Yeah, it 100% is. And I think that's at times what's frustrating about it, is you want a quick fix, you want to be totally okay, you want to be fine with your body and with food, and it is just constant kind of day-to-day working at it. And I think that's the thing, is when you get sloppy in recovery, that's when it sucks you in again. And I guess it's really frustrating for, like, and I feel like frustrated at myself probably at the moment with it, because I feel like I probably was just getting a bit sloppy with it. And actually, even last night I was talking to my other half about it and was like, And he was like, to be honest, I don't think you've been great. I think you've been fussy about food for quite a long time. And I was like, yeah, fair point. Like, but actually I was kind of convincing myself it was such a recent thing. But I think you need to have these moments in recovery where you have this realization, and then it's like, right, I need to do this and go all in again. And it's fine if you go all in and then 2 months down the line you have a bit of a plateau, and then you have to then be like, actually I'm going to do it again, and then again and again. And I think the more we put those steps in place to get there, the more likely we are to succeed. It's like, I actually had a talk last night at my local church, and the guy was saying, like, it's like training for a marathon. He wasn't talking about eating disorder recovery, but he was talking about how, like, you grow your faith, so you're training for a marathon. And I was like, that's what it is with eating disorder recovery. We have to train ourselves like we would if we're going to do like a massive event. And it's hard work, and you get tired, you feel weary a lot of the time, but you've just got to keep pushing through it, and keeping those things in mind. And actually something that really helped me this time round, but also the first time round, was I had like a list of reasons to get well and things that actually the eating disorder was stopping me doing. And I revisited it kind of a week ago and kind of made another list to just make it really, really relevant to today, with like real kind of concrete stuff and concrete things that actually, if I get to this space, I can do all of that stuff. And it feels more, I think it feels more achievable and more exciting, kind of knowing that actually I could get to that space again. Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer.
No, but that's perfect, because it serves as, like you said, the excitement and motivation in what it is what keeps you going. And I think what's tricky, I think it makes complete sense about the marathon analogy. You know, frankly, it's almost like having a couch to 5K for eating disorders. You know, there's a first step, and that first step can be very difficult, but once you do start to get momentum and you start to realize that there is some positivity at the end of it in terms of more things you can actually do, and frankly have maybe the belief that there is a more positive life at the end of it, and not, like you said, being almost scared into continuing those behaviors, that's really encouraging. Like, it's the one thing that sprung to mind when you were saying about the marathon is that naturally, whenever we want to do something that requires energy, we go to food. And it's a really difficult, like, I've certainly found in my kind of just living experience that there seems to be a very distinct separation between energy required for food and mental energy. Like, it's amazing. You could be very, very hungry, yet you could have all the motivation in the world to achieve something. So often that assumption between needing necessarily to put something into your body to be able to achieve something is not necessarily true. And therefore, there is, like you said, that separation. And I think it was something you really highlight, is that it's the eating disorder psychology. Like, and is there a kind of a simple but very difficult in practice logic that goes to say that the eating disorder is a psychology, and therefore if you can move to a psychology or a way of thinking where those assumptions aren't necessarily true, or you don't believe them in some respects anymore, that you can be on a path to a very strong recovery?
Yeah, no, there is. And I think, I guess, two things. So firstly, I think that quite often with the body image related stuff, and I guess I'm always really mindful of talking about body image, because my eating disorder wasn't caused by the fact I had bad body image, but quite often the body image gets really wrapped up in it. But interestingly, the body image is something that actually, when you go into treatment, it's very rarely tackled. And actually, for individuals, whether you've got anorexia, whether you've got bulimia, whether you've got binge eating disorder, the way that you view your body is going to change over time, and your body is likely to change. And even actually, when you look at if your body at the age of 18 is very different than what your body should be when you're in your 30s, and it just changes. Like, our bodies change. And I think with eating disorders, it's like the reason that we get so stressed about that, and I'm speaking kind of quite generally, is that actually it's because we're feeling out of control again, because the eating disorder is making us feel so much worse about it. And whilst I know my body image is extremely distorted, I know that actually if I deal with a lot of the underlying issues around the eating disorder and what it gives me, then that will kind of be changed. And I think the second thing as well, like on kind of the psychology factors, it's so true. Like, we have different triggers in life. And for me, like, if I'm triggered by something, whether it's, I don't know, it's a good example would be, so when London went into tier 4, it happened kind of, like within like a 2-hour window. And one of my safety nets was kind of working still, so being able to go into schools and do workshops, and also going to the gym. And within a 2-hour period, that had completely disappeared. And I was literally like, what am I going to do? And what my brain wanted to do was to then go to the gym that evening, even though I was having a rest day that day, but it wanted to go to the gym and not have a rest day, then like work out obsessively, to then come home and then be like, it's fine, I can get through the next couple of weeks. Now I've done that.
Screaming for control.
Yeah. But actually instead I had this proper meltdown. I cried for ages. It was quite, all of this the tears changed when I was on my way back. And I'd got Southwest trains from Clapham Junction to Earlsfield. And I literally was like, just crying on the train and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But arguably that was a better coping mechanism, because I was then able to actually be like, when I got home, I was like, do you know what? This is really difficult. This is really tough. And then I had kind of sat down, had some dinner, and then was like, actually, I need to reassess this. I need to think that actually, yes, tier 4 is a trigger for me. It probably was a trigger for a lot of people, that shift and feeling trapped and out of control. But actually my way of responding to it was to have a massive cry, was to then make a list of every single thing that I had felt grateful for in the last lockdown, and then come up with a bit of a plan of action for a new routine around actually how I was going to get through to Christmas. And like, obviously Christmas all changed again, but actually I think just identifying those triggers helps you to then change up that psychology. But also, I guess, being aware that quite often when you're in recovery from an eating disorder or other mental health issues, if you're triggered by something, you might respond in a bad way. And so when that happens, it's like learning from that and just kind of showing yourself a little bit of compassion.
Ultimately, that being kind to yourself. And I suppose in order to be kind to yourself, you've got to put yourself into perspective. And it seems like that's what you did when you got home. You say, right, okay, tier 4, I can't change that. These have changed this. However, this does not mean that I'm done for. It means that, okay, I can adopt these strategies and therefore come to a accommodation with, frankly, with your mind. So, okay, this is what's going to happen. I suppose it's a negotiation with your mind in some respect, which is such a weird thought. Did you find that, like, going through that process, like, it sounds like you're very self-aware, very insightful in yourself, and being able to go from a train journey from Clapham Junction to Earlsfield, which I know is a short journey, to be able to come to a kind of positive ending, and it not lasting a week or so in terms of yourself struggling. Is it because of the tools that you received in recovery that you were able to process that much quicker?
So I guess to caveat it, the reason I probably coped with that one much quicker was because I've had a number of moments over the last year in lockdown where I haven't expressed myself in the right way, where I've got really angry, I've shouted a lot. Quite often my other half is on the receiving end of that when it happens, in all honesty. And I kind of take my frustrations out and I can't express myself and I get in a bit of a state. And quite often it has taken me probably at least 24 hours to shift that mindset, if not more. So I think this time was more that I guess I didn't feel like I had a choice anymore. I was like, do you know what? Like, I need to crack this, because if I don't, I'm just going to sit with these feelings for the next month. And Christmas, when you have an eating disorder, is already really challenging in itself. So I was like, do you know what? I can't add to that. So I think this time around, I was like, right, I can be proactive. And I guess arguably, I probably also convinced myself that it was all going to go back to normal after Christmas. I was like, come Boxing Day and we'll be back on tier 3 and it'll be epic. And tier 3 is clearly epic.
Tier 3, we'll skip along the park. You'll be in Battersea Park with your coffee. It'll be great.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think I've learned over this year, like, how to cope with those sudden changes, much more so. And it's definitely taken me the whole year to get to that state. But I do also think that, like, I spent a year in hospital in treatment, and having kind of one-to-one psychological support and having a lot of group work actually again has helped to just equip me to kind of get to that space. And I think sometimes, and I guess, I guess to just add this in here, is I think quite often when you're a mental health nurse, just in case any mental health nurses are listening, or GPs and stuff, actually, I think it can also be really hard for them, because they don't know what seeds they're planting when someone's in treatment. And I know I was really difficult actually at points in my treatment. And I think quite often actually it is those skills and those coping mechanisms that we go back to. So I guess I just wanted to kind of put a bit of a cheesy cliche kind of, actually, do you know what, like, if you're in that role, or you're a GP, or you're in services or whatever, actually those conversations that you have, even if the individual might respond by shouting at you or getting really frustrated when they're in treatment, actually all of that stuff does stick with us. And I guess it's just important to kind of encourage people to just keep plugging away at that, and kind of keep supporting and being there for each other.
Yeah, and I think there seems to be, and it has happened quite a lot across society in the last year. We're talking, staying silent isn't an option now. And I think, like you said, the experience with the GPs, the mental health nurses, is keep plugging away. Just don't do nothing. Like every conversation does help, and I think that's really important. And it goes when we talk about mental health, it goes when we talk about racial injustice. Like, staying silent isn't an option anymore. Like, if you're worried about saying the wrong thing, then try your best, and hopefully the other person at the other end of your conversation will appreciate that you may not have got it quite right, but at least you're trying to have that conversation. Because I think you said at the beginning, like, and I think it's such a positive thing, and frankly, while we're having this conversation, that people are talking about about mental health a lot more now. But whilst we're talking about it and we're listening to it on podcasts, online, I'm still not convinced we're actually listening to each other. I'm not sure necessarily that these kind of conversations are promoting other people to have open and honest conversations.
Yeah.
I hope they are, but I'm not convinced.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think quite often, and I feel really cynical saying this, but what I've noticed in the pandemic is people have, so you might share something, not you personally, but one would share something personally about what's going on in their life, and then the other person will come back and trump that.
Yeah.
And then it becomes into this kind of like, oh, who's got it worse? And I think that's just, I think it's been a massive extreme in the last kind of year, definitely. And also when people respond and say, oh, well, at least you're not XYZ, at least you're not. Yeah. And I remember
not that helpful, I find.
Yeah. And you're just like, why? Yeah, like, this doesn't matter. Like, and I think as well, like, we also probably have a tendency, and I know that I do this, and I'm trying not to do it, but we have a tendency to try and fix other people. So we're then not listening and not giving them that space to really kind of talk about it. And I think that's for me has been a massive learning curve, actually, that I'm very good at telling people not to fix others, but I need to obviously start, I need to start doing that for myself and being a bit more proactive in that. But I think also it's important when you've had a mental health issue is to actually feel like you can say to someone, I don't want to be fixed, I just want to talk to you. And actually when I had this realization about my recovery and kind of plateauing a bit, I had to sit down with my other half and be like, actually, this is what's been going on. This is honestly what's happening. And I said to him, I don't want you to interfere, I don't want you to fix, I'm doing this on my own, and you can check in with me every 4 weeks and see how it's going, unless obviously he thinks there's like a massive intervention needed. And it was so funny because like 2 days later he tried to interfere, and I was like, what are you doing? Like, you can't do that. And then the next day we got off and he was like, no, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to. I was like, it's fine. But I think that's the thing, you have to just be so honest with people about what's going on. But just remind people that you don't want to be fixed, you just want to be heard.
And I think those conversational boundaries are highly appropriate. Like, like you say, you do it with your partner, I do it with my wife at the same time. Like, often she'll come to me, and well, it started off by me trying to fix everything, but in the end she's like, Matt, I want to talk to you, I don't want any of your solutions. Like, they may be right, but I don't care, I don't want them, I just want to vent at you. And so we have a similar thing, and to be honest, we have it quite a lot now. Like, if the other person wants to talk at the beginning of the conversation, it's like, right, I'm going to vent, I don't want you to talk, I want you to listen. And if the other person, it feels quite harsh, because all you want to do is trying to help and fix, but you realize actually that what you're doing is not trying to help and fix, and actually you're not listening either. Every time they say something, you're thinking of something else that pops into your head, and it becomes not necessarily about you, but your ideas and how you want to support, and that it's not helpful. So I do think that kind of encouraging that better listening, but I think we've been saying this for probably 1,000 years, listening.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
I'm not quite sure why we're not necessarily taking that advice, but I would hope that we do listen more.
Yeah, and I love what you've just said then about like, yeah, kind of preempting the vent with saying, I just want to vent.
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
okay to do that.
Yeah, because I was thinking the other day, randomly, was thinking like, when you're like, when my other half tries to jump, like vent or talk about whatever, I will jump in quite a bit and be like, oh, this, like, what have you thought about this? Have you done this? And then I'm like, and then we were like, am I doing that because I feel like my needs and what I'm going to say is more important?
Yeah.
And so we had to have this chat where I was like, and so now I'm consciously trying to be like, when he talks about something, I'm like, I literally am like, I didn't want to interrupt so badly, but I'm like, don't do it, Hope, don't do it. And I'm like, oh, this is so hard.
And for any of you who aren't watching who are listening, go onto the YouTube and watch our faces, because the faces, Hope, do your face, because this is my face. I'm like this. I just want to say something.
It's so hard. It is literally so difficult. You're like, oh, please just let me talk. But no, it's important. It is, and like, it is really important. Yeah, to try harder, to listen harder. If that makes sense.
And you find, because I think what's you've spoken about your partner a lot, and I assume a huge factor in supporting you. But would love to hear a bit more about eating disorders and relationships in general, and because I assume the relationship between your family that would have gone on a journey from the very beginning. As a relatively new parent myself, I can imagine, I can perhaps start to imagine what your parents might have thought when you were 12, and maybe apportion some of the some blame onto them. That's very complicated, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's fine. So I guess firstly, kind of family relationships. So background, I'm one of 5. There's 4 of us who are very close in age, kind of a year apart averagely, and then I've got a younger sister who is 8 years younger than me. So when I started treatment, Molly must have been like 9 or 10 at the time, so she didn't really know what was going on. And I think looking back, like, it was really, really hard for her, because she'd come and visit me in hospital but not really be kind of brought into the loop as much. My older sister was at uni, just started uni when I went into treatment. So again, it was difficult for her, trying to support me remotely, but also was trying to like settle herself too, and to get to a space where actually things were going to be kind of a bit strange and a bit hard. And then my older brother was a year older than me, so he actually went traveling for a year, kind of partway through my hospital admission. And then Samuel, my younger brother, I guess was kind of left with a lot of the kind of responsibilities, and he would often have to sit with me at breakfast, which was really difficult for him. And looking back, like, it was really, really difficult. And we are very close now, and he always tells me like how proud he is of me, and that he's like loves me a lot. And we send like these really lame messages to each other like once every couple of weeks, and then we send these stupid emojis after, and then we don't talk about it for like a couple of days. We're like, this is so uncomfortable. And
that's so nice, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it is, like, I think it's hard for siblings, because your role isn't a caring role necessarily, but you love that person so much that you're like, what do I do? Like, how do I do this? And that's just, right now there isn't any support for siblings either, really, in this space. So again, like, you don't have that outlet, you don't get it. And I think, so that was difficult. And I think my parents then, my parents had a lot of stuff going on when I was in hospital. So they got divorced actually like a year after I came out of hospital. But I hated my mum for the whole time I was in hospital. I blamed her for the fact that I was there. I didn't think she got it. I also made her do the eating disorder diet that I was on. So my mum had to, like, and looking back, it was ridiculous. I think my mum was okay doing it because she wanted me to get to a better space and put on the weight. But it also meant for her that her relationship with food probably shifted slightly as well. And actually, when I came out of hospital, I didn't really speak to my mum for about 3 years because we just had so much anger and so much emotion going on. And looking back, like, it was really frustrating. I think quite often with eating disorder treatment, they use family therapy to treat the eating disorder. But because my family was so volatile and there was so many different emotions going on, it just didn't work. And I wish that as a family and as a treatment team, we'd pushed through that and actually got to that space. But I think it was hard. And I guess now in my family, I slot back into the role of, I'm the fixer. I kind of care about, I'm the carer. Like, I manage the emotions and relationships, and that's still something that I have to, like, I feel like I have to do, and kind of put that ownership on myself. And I think from my side, like, it'd probably be interesting to see like how that changes as I get older and have my own family. But at the moment, I'm kind of okay with it, I think. And then I'm trying to think, and then like friends wise, I think friends have always been great, but again, kind of difficult for friends to navigate. And I think it's hard because you don't really know what to say, what you shouldn't say. So something that in the work I do now, like, I often am like, actually, these are the things that are just unhelpful. And it's even little things like when you comment on someone with an eating disorder looking healthy, although that might seem like completely okay, when you've had an eating disorder, if someone says that to you, it's just like, oh, my brain has gone into overdrive. Like, what does healthy mean? What does this look like?
Sorry to interrupt, just on that point, going back to what we said earlier, would you prefer someone not to say that, or would you prefer them to stay silent? Because obviously they're trying to say something encouraging and supportive, but obviously it's not. So what's the balance? And for those friends who are supporting people with eating,
so I think it's about kind of commenting maybe on other things. So when you have an eating disorder, whatever sort of eating disorder it is, you do lose this kind of glow in your face. You don't smile as much, or maybe not as actively involved at meal times. Your hair often thins, and whilst obviously everyone's eating disorder is so unique and we all have different side effects, those are kind of core ones that often present. So I think for me, it's like, actually, I guess, like saying to someone, oh, it's amazing that you're so involved today, or your hair's looking really good, or like, I really like it when people say, oh, you've got that glow back, you've got more energy, you're talking more. Because actually I'm an extremely talkative person, and but when I'm struggling again, I kind of withdraw a lot. So I think that's quite a good one.
Okay, so it's focusing. So I suppose for the friend's perspective, it's focusing on what they know their friends' positives are. And I suppose that's bespoke, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, exactly. And I think, like, so in my family, we don't talk about weight obviously ever, but I am allowed, and me and my mum have got this relationship now where I can say to her, does my weight look okay? Like, how does this look? And actually having that direct question every now and again is something that is helpful to have, because I've got that sounding board which sometimes I need. And at first it was definitely a clutch. It was definitely something that I would ask to be like, I'm not okay. Like, I'm still struggling with this. But over time, it's become something that I've asked less and less and less. But yeah, my mum's the only one who can have that conversation with me. And I trust her with that, actually.
And what happens in the situation where you do say, you ask about your weight with your mum, and she comes back and says, actually, I don't think it is right? Like, because that's obviously a difficult thing to say, but the fact that you have that relationship now, which is an amazing relationship to have that conversation, but you're going to have to navigate and deal when perhaps it's not the answer you want.
Yeah, no, and it's so true. So in 2016, I relapsed, and my mum came to London. I'd kind of stopped messaging on WhatsApp and just had kind of completely withdrawn. And she did come and she picked me up on my weight. And I think it was interesting because it was a very ballsy thing of her to do, firstly. But I didn't get angry. I was relieved that someone had reached out and said something to me, actually. And a couple of weeks later, actually, one of my best friends, Nikki, she also said, she asked me, are you calorie counting again? And actually, she didn't say, she didn't comment on my weight or anything, but it was that realization that actually she'd noticed that something wasn't quite right. And whether it was a weight thing she'd noted, or whether it was just that behavior, that withdrawal stuff, and actually having those conversations, I think definitely get easier. But I guess the caveat all of that is actually quite often when you have an eating disorder, we talked about how secretive it is. So more often than not, when you have that direct conversation, whilst I think it's so important, like, the person will say they're okay, they'll push back. And in those situations, it's like, actually, you have to follow up. You have to keep checking in with them and keep giving them that space to feel really, really heard.
And I wonder whether, very difficult, but do you push it when, if someone gives you an answer, you say, I'm sorry, I don't believe that? Like, is it something to push, or is it something to go, okay, privately acknowledge that, okay, I think that something's not right. They are not talking about it. They don't want to talk about it. So perhaps my role isn't to push, but it is to maybe check in a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it is about with them. And if you're a friend as well, then it's like if you feel like you want to tell a parent, like, do it. Like, I think so often we get so caught up in like letting someone down and losing that trust, but actually at the same time, like, sometimes we have to I guess not tell on them's the wrong word, but we have to bring that behavior out, because if we don't, then actually that individual is going to keep struggling and suffering in silence. And I think it's really hard with eating disorders though, because it isn't about the weight, and you can't tell how someone is doing based on their weight. You can have someone who's overweight, a healthy weight, someone who's muscular, someone who's unhealthy. And because eating disorders aren't about that, it's like actually that person could look fine, but be mentally really, really struggling. So I guess it's like, I think just checking in with your friends who've had eating disorders and identifying that there will be certain points of the year that might be a little bit more challenging, and just opening that dialogue. And I think for me, like, I'm lucky in that sense that my friends know when to do that now. So like in the run up to Christmas, and like just things like that, like they're just aware of it.
And I think I 100%, I'd never really quite clutched the impact it could have on people around Christmas time. Like then it started challenging. I said, why is everyone obsessed about food at Christmas anyway? Like, everyone just seems to talk about food. What are we eating? What are we doing? What is this? And actually, you can see how for a lot of people that can be really, 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 really difficult. And perhaps in some respects, it seems like what you're suggesting as well is that not only having a good supportive network around you, but a supportive network that communicates independently of you as well, so that everyone's almost looking after you. There's a kind of supportive web around you, where your friend might be speaking to your parents, and everyone's just kind of checking in just to make sure that everything's okay. But that does take, that does take, when lives are busy, it's important to prioritize that and watch when your friends' behaviors do change. And I think during lockdown you can start to see when behaviors do change, and then when they do change and you think, oh, that's not quite right, make sure you do reach out and find that energy that that conversation will lead to something a bit more positive.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think again, it's really hard, and it's particularly the older you get, because you do have other relationships that maybe your parents don't know about. You might have friends that you're closer to, we all just grow apart. That's the point that we'll grow apart, and it will change and it will adapt. And I think that's also what's challenging, is I know for me, like, I often will say to someone, but I'm telling you, but do not tell anyone else. Like I want to be able to manage this, I want to do this on my own. But actually I do also know that actually when I do say that, people do still have that conversation. But I guess for me to feel less guilty about it, it does help alleviate it a little bit. And I think as well, actually something that I do talk about kind of sometimes is having like a bit of a prevention kind of plan or strategy in place. And I think this goes for every single type of mental health issue. And I think Mind maybe have one on their website, I'm not sure. But it basically is just like an A4 page where you write kind of the behaviors to look out for if you're starting to struggle again. Like whether it's kind of a food related issue, whether it's you drinking more, you're withdrawing, whatever it is, kind of looking at those behaviors and making sure that they're real concrete behaviors. You then work it through with someone else, and so that person is aware of this, and then you both kind of sign it. So you're like, actually, I'm making a commitment to this. Next time I get into this, actually, you can pull this out. And I think it's really important you do that when you're in that right headspace and you're feeling more positive and better about things, because actually that's when you don't want the illness to come back and you don't want to start struggling. And I think like, regardless if you have a mental health issue or not, actually those are the kind of things that really, really help you. I actually created a couple of weeks ago like a wellbeing container thing, which basically had a list of things that I need to do every single day and every single week to manage my recovery and to manage my emotional well-being. And on it, there's like a little box in the corner, which is like emergency. So in like an emergency situation would be when my mood is kind of plummeted, I'm stressing, I'm maybe crying and shouting. And on it, my other half is able to kind of make me a cup of tea and force me to go for a walk or to sit outside, and he can have that. And we've written down exactly the phrasing that he would use. I haven't yet had to use it yet. And I'm not sure how I will respond when it happens.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to look actually as individuals, what do we need every single day, every single week to keep ourselves in that right headspace?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we, what we're trying to promote, an understanding of those kind of tools and techniques and tips that have helped you in your very specific journey, but that might be more kind of broadly accessible and available to other people. Because I think what I've certainly realized, like along this sidekick journey, is that because my mental health journey is that there's a lot of stuff which you can pay for, which is important. Professional help is also exceptionally important, but there's loads of stuff which you can do for free every day, which can help you prevent things from happening. So I'd be interested to know from your perspective, from from a perspective of your own eating disorder, what are your tools and tips? What is in that wellbeing container? What do you do every day that really helps you?
So I'm trying to think now kind of concisely what I do every day. I do a lot.
But that's okay. To do a lot is great.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear it.
So I guess the first thing is I always have a quiet time every single day. So for me, my quiet time is reading my devotional and kind of praying. But for other people, it could be kind of meditating. It could be just journaling as well, maybe in your quiet time. But I always block out a 20-minute to 30-minute time where I will do that.
That's a good way to frame it. It doesn't matter what you do, it's just quiet time.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
And then I guess a more lockdown specific one at the moment. So I'm I'm listening to podcasts and making sure that kind of 3 times a week I'm going out on my own for a walk at lunchtime to listen to a podcast. And actually last week my other half came with me and we both listened to podcasts because I was like, this is my podcast time. And we must have looked like we'd had this massive argument walking down the street next to
you. You may hold my hand, but you must not talk to me.
Pretty much. Yeah. And I think actually, you know what, it was really nice doing it with someone, but feeling like I could do that like that.
Yeah.
I think for me, exercise is a big part of my recovery, and it is something that I obviously have to be really mindful of, but it does help to give me the headspace that I really need, and like the headspace to the headspace to kind of understand where I'm at with things, to process things, to think about things. And whether that's kind of exercising in a walk or kind of doing I do quite a bit of strength training, and I'm a runner, so kind of using all of that kind of varied up, but also making sure when I do exercise that I'm doing it for the right reasons. So I'm not doing it to kind of burn calories or punish myself, but I'm moving for that enjoyment and pleasure aspect.
And do you have to remind yourself on that? You say, right, I'm going to do some strength training now, but I'm not doing it for X, Y, and Z. I'm doing it because of this. And I think that's a really important thing. You said, but to your mind, you'll say, I'm doing this for positivity, not for negativity.
Yeah, no, and do you know what it is? I have to, I guess I don't have to say that every single time, but there are certain points when I have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think when I've had a particularly difficult week, or if I'm feeling a bit stressed about something, then that's when I have to be a bit like, actually, this is what's happening. And again, I think if you're someone who is kind of obsessively exercising, you have to learn to be honest with yourself about that. Like if you can't go a day without exercise, or if you can't be honest with people around you, and I think having that accountability in that again really, really helps. And actually, just for example, so this morning I slept really badly last night, got up this morning, my alarm went off, and I was like, do you know what, I really don't want to get up, I really don't want to go for a run. But then at the same time I knew that actually if I didn't kind of go for a run this morning, then mentally, whether it was an eating disorder thing or not, actually I wasn't going to feel great today, and it was going to set me up kind of not for a great start to my week. So instead of going for like a long kind of compounding run, I actually did a slow jog, stopped in Battersea Park, took some nice photos. The sky looked amazing, so I was like, I'm so pleased I did this. But actually, and I think just being aware of that, so actually I knew that I'd feel better for going for a run, but I knew that I had to be mindful of how I was running and what I was doing. So actually I think having that is really important actually.
And I think it's like, I think you highlight the need to be flexible as well. So you're saying that this particular time is running time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be running 5-minute miles. Like if you're not feeling like you're able to do that, then just getting out and jogging for 10 minutes and walking for the rest of the time, that's okay, because you know from your own personal experience that you'll come home and you'll feel better, and you'll sit down, whatever you're doing for the rest of your day, and go, I exercise, I feel good. And that's a really nice way, like you say, to start the day, but also to start the week, because we do work in these funny cycles, which are, it does make it does really help if we start to kind of front load our positivity, because then when we reach the end of the week and we're exhausted, we say, oh, do you know what, I can chill out now, I've done loads.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I agree. Yeah, agreed. And I think on that positivity thing, actually something that I do, and I don't do it every day, but I try and do it kind of weekly, is just think about things I'm grateful for. And I think like writing them down for me really helps, because it just helps me to kind of, I guess, ground myself a little bit more, actually, to be like, actually, I'm thankful for all of this stuff. And yeah, life might feel really difficult, but I do believe that there is always something to be grateful for. And even if that, like some days for me, that's literally like my duvet. I'm like, I'm so grateful for my duvet. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Or I might be like listing my things off through like tears, but I'm like, actually, there is still stuff. And I think then, like, I guess finally is just that kind of, I guess, like just talking about things. And I always think like when you say that, and we've talked a little bit about the talking and the listening and stuff already, but it's like actually just really being honest with people around you. And whether that's in the form of therapy, whether that's in the form of, like talking to your family or writing stuff down and sending emails, actually just allowing yourself that space to talk. And I guess in one sense, like I do feel quite lucky, because I've had a lot of therapy in my life, and I've had that space to really process a lot of stuff and kind of get to a space where I don't really need that therapy quite as much anymore. And some people won't yet be at that space, which is totally fine. But I think just working out actually where you're at with things and who you've got around you. And actually, I do sometimes when I go into schools and stuff, you have kids who come up to you and they're like, oh, I've got no one to talk to. Like, how do I talk to my friends? Like, what will they think? And I think sometimes it is just like, some days I will literally say to like my mum or my sister or whatever, I don't feel great today. And it's like, they don't try and work out what the problem is. They don't even ask me why I don't feel great. They just accept the fact I don't feel great today, and I just need to tell someone. And I think having that is really, really important. And if we start doing that, then actually slowly over time, we will then feel like we are more able to share more of our vulnerabilities with someone.
I think you raised a really important point about kind of validating your validating feelings and getting people to accept your feelings. It's if you're not having a good day, that's not a signal for someone to try and cheer you up. No. It's for someone to go, yeah, okay, I'm so sorry you're not having a great day, and perhaps just carry on a conversation about something completely mindless. But there's a real interesting process about someone validating and saying, oh yeah, it's okay to feel crap. Because
I think it is important. And I think it's like, it's okay to have a rubbish day and to feel rubbish, but it's like, what then? What do you need in that space at that moment? And sometimes actually I'll bring up my sister and be like, please just talk at me. And it must be tough. She's then like, oh, what have I done? And literally now she's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, talk. So but I think working out who you've got around you, and also realizing that some of your friends you won't want to share stuff with, and that is totally okay. And it's like, work out then what their role is. Like, I've got friends who I don't talk to about like mental health stuff, but know that actually if I'm feeling rubbish, I can give them a ring and we'll go out and we'll like have a like good evening out, which obviously right now we can't do that, but actually just having that distraction in place and knowing where people fit in is really important.
And I think like it seems that while we're talking about the tools and tips and techniques, like really what we're saying underlying all of this, and often what we hear about on across a lot of these podcast conversations is just give yourself time, and that time every day to do X, Y, Z to make you feel better. That's the important thing. It's time for yourself. It's time away from work. It's time to have a conversation. It's ultimately what starts all of this. Before you say I'm going to meditate, pray, whatever it is, you need to give yourself time to do that. And if you don't give yourself time, then whatever you're struggling with, it is there's a much greater probability that you're not going to recover from that.
No, exactly. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Whatever's going on, it's like give yourself that space and work out what those steps will be to get to that point where actually you're able to manage it and you're able to start prioritizing your needs against others. And I think I get it's really difficult, and I guess in that sense as well, whilst I do kind of take on the role of kind of caring for my family in that sense, like I don't have children of my own, so I've got I wouldn't be able to navigate, I don't think, homeschooling and working and all of this sort of stuff. But I think it is like, whatever it is, just taking that little bit of a time for yourself is just key at the moment.
Yeah, and allowing yourself to process some of these
Yeah.
difficult things you're you're thinking about and talking about.
Mm.
Hope, thank you so much for fascinating, insightful conversation. We have gone from your journey from the age of starting at the age of 12, but before that, and working our way to where, you know, in a position now where you're having a conversation, you're going into schools, and frankly, you're talking about that inspirational journey and spreading that message that 100% recovery is possible.
Cool. No, thanks so much for having me on. It's been literally lovely talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. I've greatly enjoyed it. And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. Just search for Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show. And you can check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad, a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. The app enables you to build a personalized wellbeing toolkit to help you deal with life's ups and downs. Just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Hope, thank you so much again for your time.
No, thank you so much.